Yeah, well, it's starting now. I've been holding back until the book was kind of on the verge of being out to
Smart.
talk about groups as much. Well, was it? Who we'll find out.
So, listen, I've got your book right here. Thank you for sending it to me.
Oh, yeah, of
Um,
course.
it is so it is the best cover of any book that's on my shelf right now in the past 9, 10 months. So that is kudos to you for that one. First of all, let me just know, how is the launch going?
I mean, it's good. It's good. It's exhausting, but I mean, I guess that's the good problem to have, right? Where there's a lot of stuff going on and too many things flooding my inbox for me to keep up with. Um, but yeah, it's been really fun. I think it is a relief to have it out in the world, and there's no more sort of buildup of the things that I feel like I should be doing before it comes out. But now it's like, oh, I've done what I could do, and now it's out, and we'll see what happens.
Yeah, now comes stoicism time in terms of like what can you not control. Um, so let me start with this. And this, I'm not a podcast interviewer. I say this every
Mhm.
single time. We're just hanging out. So I've listened to you several podcasts by you. You are very verbose and articulate. You have almost no verbal graffiti, which is super impressive. Probably comes with your whole music life that's the undercurrents of academia.
Oh no, it's actually from a weirder place than that. So when I was trying to keep my head above water when I lived in New York, my other marketable skill was taking standardized tests. So I taught for Kaplan, and Kaplan test
No
prep
way.
is like, it's like the McDonald's of teaching. And so I worked for them so much I became a teacher trainer, and they're very strict about verbal graffitis. So, I had to be doing this teacher trainer stuff, and I used to be really good about like no likes, no ums. I'm much worse now that I've been away from it for a long time. But yeah, I trained myself at one time to have almost none of it because of Kaplan.
Even though this is being recorded, if you could be honest, have you ever taken a test for someone else and gotten paid for it?
No, no, no. I don't even know how that would work with some of them. It's pretty tough.
If you had a way Toastmasters, which I've never actually done before, and versus Kaplan, be trained as a teacher and then train other teachers, which do you think is better for improving your public speaking skills?
Oh, doing Kaplan was great for my public speaking skills. Especially it was like the same thing over and over. So like sometimes I teach three of the same classes in a row, and they're more script like. So you're just kind of going through it. And also, it's like when you're doing math in front of a bunch of people, that's I think a harder thing to do when you're like trying to do algebra up on the board and answer questions about it. It's a different kind of public speaking challenge.
Yeah, you don't own the audience like talking about how do you break free from conformity pressures. Doesn't have the
Right.
same oomph to it. All right, so let me jump into lots of things I want to talk about. So one thing, listening to you on podcasts, there seems to be there's two studies you are in love with and everyone else is in love with. And I just want to know if there's anything about these that you want to cover. So one of them, which and I love both these studies.
Mm.
So one of them is basically the study of the percentage of people who cannot name the number of people in their group. And then the other one is what is the which I think is like the ultimate question. And I think you did a great
Mhm.
job of kind of making this like a nexus point in your book
Mm.
is like, what's the optimal number of people in a group? And then what do people feel satisfied with the number of people in a group? And
Mhm.
just anything about that you feel you didn't get a chance to talk about in terms of like implications, thoughts about it?
No, I mean, it's funny though. Those two studies, I think they're great, and I love them because they're these great anecdotes and these kind of great, you know, quantification of these problems with teams. That like 93% of top management teams don't come up with the same number of people on their team. But the reason I keep going back to those is that there aren't enough descriptive studies of teams. That when I was looking for, what are some numbers that are really going to pop? It was surprising how many times I like couldn't find a number that I really wanted to exist. And so I was, working really hard to be like, how can I like say, not talk about effect sizes too much and talk about like the real number of people or talk about
Yeah,
percentages and
percentages.
stuff. Yeah. And so, I mean, I think these are both great studies, but they're like, that the team, the senior leadership team one that's part of a very small part of that study where I kind of keyed in on this one thing in it. And the 4.5 members where we are, we don't feel a team is too big or too small. And when you ask people, when's your team too big and how many people are in it and when's it too small, they cross at 4.5. But that study is from 1970.
Right.
And so like, the thing if I would love to do is have people do more of that kind of work and to just be like, how many people are on your team?
The
Is it too big? Is it
basics.
too small? Yeah, to really have these descriptive things because we don't have like a general social survey for teams. We don't have like these like big descriptive things that are out there telling us, like how happy are people generally in different countries or stuff like that. Like there's no equivalent in the teams literature.
There are so many things in there that I want to highlight that you said that I think are important to writers, authors, thinkers, anyone involved in organizations. So let me just and tell me if I get any of this wrong. One of the things that's important is pay attention to the year that your study that you're in terms of the science, right?
Mhm.
A lot of times people don't mention the year that it was conducted. So 1970, there wasn't even a whiff of the internet. So in
Yeah,
terms of remote work, no such thing like that
yeah.
happens there. I mean, just in terms of transport in the first place. So one is go look at old studies that have been forgotten, but pay attention to the year. And then the second one is we really jump to the sexy, what's going to get in the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal and the Economist as an op-ed. And then we skip over these really basic questions. And I love that you just said, I was on the hunt to find the number, like, or the range of numbers that goes in there. And I think we don't get incentivized enough to ask this basic question of like, if you wanted to form a pickleball league, what would be the best number where everybody would feel good about themselves and meet their psychological needs
Mhm.
for belonging and competence and
Right.
autonomy and all
Hmm.
that? And like you're saying, like whoever's listening, like go take this, like a very simple study, and the media is gonna go gaga over it.
Yeah. Absolutely. I mean, and I think the point about old studies, like one of the things I wanted to do with the book was not to kind of, you know, put on a pedestal studies that just came out. And and especially studies where I don't have as much confidence in what I'm interpreting from them. So I really did try to say like there haven't been as many books about groups and group dynamics as there have been certainly about individuals and how to make ourselves better as individuals. And so I tried to really go back and tell the story of decades and decades of research and to highlight things that I thought were really reliable and weren't getting talked about enough. And those are honest. They're usually coming from very old studies.
Yeah.
And the challenge was really to like, how do I kind of bring these old insights into the modern world? And it's not that like nobody's ever mentioned this before, that my mentor, Richard Hackman, has said a lot of these same ideas. And in fact, the two things we just talked about came from his research. And, but that, when you read older books, even a book that's 20 years old, it doesn't always resonate for people. And the kind of examples, the way the world's changed, even the language in it, or the genre of nonfiction writing have changed in this time. And I think I looked at the challenge of what I was doing more of saying, how can I meet people where they are with what I think they need to know about groups, whether that's going to be, the sexy stuff that gets would get an article in the New York Times today or it's not. These are the things I think are most important to know. And my challenge is to make it interesting and feel current to the modern world.
Yeah, no, I like the idea of like you as the curator of like let me spare you the pain of reading a book with racist and sexist tropes that are in there from 1970, and I'll just extract the cool wisdom and I'll put it into some modern stories. And what I love is as a relative used to be sports fan is you have some nice like sports stories to kind of cut
Mhm.
across. And it's different than other books because I think a lot of other books go for it's an interesting question as an author. This is kind of like an author question. Is you have do you want to have like massive variety of stories so you're kind of like wowed every single chapter? Or do you want to have this nice theme, a grounding theme that cuts across all the chapters where you don't feel like you're being pushed and pulled with the brain of the author? And it seems to me, but correct me if I'm wrong, is like you really went for threats.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's funny you say that because there are actually fewer threads, I think, than there were in the original version. So at some point for the for the paid subscribers and stuff, I'm going to release the chapters that got cut. But we had a whole section that got cut that was much more of this like narrative thread throughout the whole thing. And I had these stories about my grandfather being a second Japanese generation Japanese American fighting in World War II and parallels with Hannah Arendt. And that was like running through a lot of the book. And that all got cut.
That got cut? Wait, who did Caroline cut that?
No, no, no. It was more towards the end. I totally agree with the cut because it had to come at the beginning, but it made it feel like it was less of a book about like how do you make your teams better, and it felt more like it was a book about kind of intergroup dynamics, and it was talking more about this like sorting metaphor. So I start the book with this idea that the Sorting Hat is the villain of the Harry Potter stories, and it kind
Yeah,
of
which is great.
yeah, takes that sorting theme, it really plays that out for 4 chapters. And it just felt like I think it made it seem like it wasn't the kind of book it was gonna ultimately be, which was one that was more leaning towards, well, what do we do about this? How do we fix this? And so we felt like it worked better to start with the material that's like, what does a good team really look like? What does a good group look like? And that we want to get to that fast and not, make you wait, 50, 60, 70 pages to hear about the first group that works.
Yeah. So let's touch upon this because there to me you can break it down into two themes in terms of what you want to group for. This is relatively arbitrary.
Mhm.
Productivity, creativity, right? Get things done, do some things in a new way. Obviously, there's a Venn diagram between the two, but when you think about like some of the elements like in your book, like relationship conflict versus task conflict, like what do you want to focus on? One of the things like I'm curious of, and this goes a little bit beyond the book, which is let's just talk about group dynamics here,
Mhm.
is like how do those findings differ when the objective is to do something creative versus just um, exploitation versus exploration, to use the
Mhm.
academic terms.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think that's, the central question when you're a creativity researcher, right? Especially creativity at work. Because what makes it something about creativity at work is it's something that would be different than if we were doing a really routine, boring kind of production task. Uh, and the things for groups, the the thing that always sticks with me is when you're doing creative work. I talk a lot about the importance of having really clear, vivid goals for a team, and that's what helps us stay coordinated. If we're not trying to get to the same place, that we're not going to be able to stay together. And those are kind of, it's a very intuitive picture of what makes a good group, right? Like if I'm like, hey man, let's meet tomorrow in California, like, we don't have a chance of hell of finding each other, right? That both of those are way too vague. And yet, like work teams all the time, we have goals that are kind of that like California tomorrow level of specificity. But
Right.
when we're doing creative work, inherently when you're doing something creative, you don't know the future. You don't know exactly what it's going to look like. And it's much more difficult to create that kind of alignment around like this, smart goal that's specific, measurable, and time bound. So we have to kind of do different things to manage our progress and kind of keep aligned as a team, and that those things kind of vary across the creative process, right? Like the doing creative work as a team is like you're doing a bunch of kind of smaller micro tasks where some of them are very generative and thinking off in different directions, and some of them are much more, learning to get distance from your own ideas and kind of be outsiders within the group, or be our own kind of critics and feedback. And that kind of challenge, I think, does differ from other kinds of work into how we sort of stay aligned around something that none of us know what it is, and that we're kind of co-discovering it as we go.
It's very clear that you're Teresa's mentee. Let me run this by it, because this was like the very first scientific article I think that I wrote in my career, and it was basically is that these models of creativity, and disagree, like go anywhere, like,
Hmm.
I don't care. You know, I have thick skin.
Yeah.
Is that one of the things that people miss in these models of creativity is one of the early phases is, do you actually want to be creative? Like, do you
Hmm.
understand? It's kind of like what you just said. Do you understand the consequences of, if you want to create something unique, you're going to get friction come back at you. You're not going to get 100% approval. You're, like you said, like the probability that's going to work just drop precipitously compared to whatever else you possibly could have done in the next hour or 3 hours. And I wonder of your thoughts about, why is this as relevant as I think it is? And if so, like, why is this being skipped so often when when we have so many books talking about the practicality of trying to become more creative as an individual or as a team?
So just to make sure I'm understanding, so you're sort of saying the first part is, are we skipping whether we even agree that we want to be creative in the first place?
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I think the idea of, I like, especially when you study teams, a lot of people are kind of assuming that other people know why they're there. Like once you're in a room together, it's like, oh yeah, we're here to like, design this new product. But that doesn't always mean the same thing to everybody. And so I think it's absolutely true that we have to be explicit about what we want and what we think that means. And we have to, we don't have to come to perfect agreement on it, but it's helpful to know where everybody else stands, in these kind of situations. So I think, you know it in these organizational contexts, there's a lot of times I think people don't think that they're going to need to be creative, that they do, and then they, kind of as you're implying, behave in ways that would be inconsistent with trying to explore and come up with new things and being open to failure. And it's kind of like Amy Edmondson's work where she talks about framing the task. And that if you frame the work accurately at the beginning and say, this is going to require experimentation, we're going to fail. There's going to be stuff that we need to try, and we're not going to know if it's going to work. And that's what we're here to do. That's how we're going to work together. So I think there's, kind of like pieces from other places that kind of talk about this, especially in teams. I mean, I would be even, I think, more critical than you were, though, of the creative process models that I'm, as somebody who came at this interested in improvisation. The process models don't make any sense to me. They just kind of look like gibberish when you're like, oh, you're presented with this task, and then you go out and you prepare, and then you generate ideas. It's like, no, that's not the order things happen in when you're in a jazz ensemble. That's not at
Okay.
all the
This
order they happen in.
I'm so glad you went this direction. Let's because I know you talk about it so many places, so I want to do something interesting new here. Let's move from the jazz framework to just the improv of just
Hmm.
conversations.
Yep.
Right here, right now, right?
Hmm.
Like
Yeah. Yeah.
we
Yeah.
didn't talk about what we're going to talk about here. Um, I want to know, like, and I know other people are definitely interested in, what's your beefs? Where do you have issues? What would you like to fix up? Like, even if people aren't aware of these models.
Yeah. I mean, I think the idea generation, like the kind of classical brainstorming idea of creativity, where you come up with a bunch of ideas and then you like later on kind of, pick out your favorites and build on them, and that you have this kind of iteration. It's true, but that like in most of the times where we're actually creative, especially in interaction and, whether it's just a conversation or it's a group, it's stuff where you're building on what other people are saying in a much more real-time way, right? And that the idea that then we're going to like stop at the end of this conversation and go, oh, which were the good ideas? Which were the creative bits?
Right.
And we're going to
Right.
like, that's not actually what we're doing. What we're doing is we're playing with them. You kind of create a holding space where it's okay to say things that you might not have said before, to think things that you haven't thought before, and that we're not always even conscious of the way that we're co-creating something, a different conversation than we've ever had. And the, thinking of creativity, and this, maybe this is kind of pushing back against what you were saying before, as it's got to be this special thing that we're prepared and it's different than our normal lives. Like, I think my perspective on, how creative stuff especially comes out of interaction is it's much more emergent. It's happening all the time if we're attuned to it happening. And, whether we, want to acknowledge the fact that we're not doing planned stuff, we're not just, setting goals and having plans and then enacting them. And that, for the most part, what we're doing is we're ignoring the creative stuff that we're already doing and we're already thinking. And then kind of pretending like we've had these plans and we've had these goals and
Right.
that's how we get through life.
More being and doing, less thinking. And this is very apropos because Alison Wood Brooks is listening. She just said she's super excited to read your book.
Oh,
Um,
hey,
who
Allison.
is definitely one of the conversational
Yeah.
master blasters out there.
Yeah.
So if you were working with someone who, and this is one of my areas of research, and I used to treat teenagers, adolescents that were socially anxious with socially anxious people, and they said to you, like, I'd love to be more spontaneous and creative and interesting in conversations. I'm curious from your team group dynamics lens, what you might offer or suggest to them.
It's a great question. I mean, to me, being more spontaneous is almost like this like profound spiritual thing to have to think about, where it kind of almost gets into these like questions about like the nature of human experience, where if you're not being spontaneous, like in some ways I don't even understand what you're doing, because this is kind of what I'm saying. We're always being spontaneous. If you can have a conversation with somebody, like, did you plan all that? Like, were you scripting everything beforehand? Like, you can do it. It's just kind of a question of whether we get in our own head so much and don't let ourselves do it. And I mean, I think I say this also as somebody who is, super, super introverted and very like, yeah, if I could get out of social situations, I usually would choose to get out of them. But it's like when you're there, you're there. And I think that's one of the things that, whether it's jazz or it's sports or anything where you have to interact with people in real time, like if you don't commit to being there and just listening to the other person and finding ways for whatever the kind of critical voices in your head are, to realize that those are illusory. And it took me a lot of hours in the practice room to get to a point where I was comfortable feeling like those things were illusory. Uh, I think it changes your outlook on everything. So on some level, it's like, just go do something with other people that you like doing and then, take that feeling with you to other situations. So, for me, those were both, they were, as you picked up on, they were jazz and they were sports, and having to go, interact with other people in ways where, if you sit there and you are worried about what you're going to do next, like bad things are going to happen. Like you just can't. There's no way to do that.
Colin, this is my favorite thing you've said so far. Like I'm smiling ear to ear because like I loved this advice. I love the idea of reminding people when they had this anxious anticipation for a social interaction of let's do an inventory of what you've done in just the past 2 days. Like give 48 hours of like
Mhm.
how many interactions you've spontaneously played in. And I think even me, who's probably pretty far down the spectrum from you on the introversion, extroversion
Mhm.
dimension, is like you forget. Like you just forget of like just how much skill like resides within you over just planned and unplanned practices. Like I love what you said. Oh my God, I'm so glad this is being recorded for other people to hear this. Can I do a 60-degree detour to a totally
Yeah,
different
please.
thing?
Please.
This okay,
Yeah.
okay. This is how my mind works. Um, so there's a model about groups that you're probably, I mean, you're more of an expert in this than me, that I'm very fond of, which is Carsten de Drew's model of the notion of that you can have this two pathway model of group creativity, where one is a distress oriented pathway with a lot of negative emotions, and one is
Mhm.
this, for lack of a better word, like a positive emotion, joyous pathway that goes in
Mhm.
there. And then you don't mention it in the book, but I wonder if we overlaid that onto the book, how that modifies some of your practical suggestions or what you think people should consider when it comes to be better in groups.
I mean, I think it lines up pretty well for the most part. Like when I think about the kind of like dual pathway models in creativity, like your some motivation to change things in the world comes from dissatisfaction. That if I'm not dissatisfied with the status quo, to kind of to your point, I'm not going to try to do anything creative. Right, that like I need to have this sort of like there's a lack, whether it's writing a poem or whatever it is, that like there's this sense of the world as it is right now isn't okay without me doing something more. But then
Love that.
once we've that, and that kind of negative affect takes us into selecting into situations where we're going to try to do something creative. But then once we're in that situation, now that negative affect can get in our way, right? Like that when we have too much sort of negative cognitive activation, it's going to put us on familiar routes through our brain, right? Like that the connections we make are more likely to be ones that are familiar. They're less likely to be ones that they're unfamiliar. And that when we're in more positive affective states, we're going to make more of these kind of unusual connections or than we otherwise would. So it's sort of like, all right, if we want to get mad and complain about a bunch of stuff at the beginning, and that kind of like helps us find these problems that we want to solve or define them better, great. That's good. But then once we've decided to do that, then we need to harness that energy and turn it around where it's, we're not doing too much, especially self-criticism, as you were kind of alluding to, but to really get optimistic about our ability to solve it. And that's going to help us then be more generative in the second space. So I think there's sort of the how we define goals. And I think, we do define better goals when we're a little bit pissed off about the status quo, that's where we're going to do the most ambitious, creative stuff is we're like, yeah, the world as it is needs me to do something ambitious here and not just accept it. And that does come sometimes from negative affect.
I There's a lot of things I like here. I mean, one of the things I like is getting out of the self-focused mindset, and the anger is almost at the external world in terms of like, how could you not provide these nutrients? How could you create these barriers? Like, how could you have not fixed this damn problem by now that happens there?
Mhm.
And I like it. It's like, people hate staged models as scientists. People in the real world love staged
Mhm.
models. That's worthy of a conversation. And for a lot of scientists to start talking about of maybe these dimensional models are, if they don't get picked up and people don't use them, well, then who cares, right?
Yeah.
It's like when I was a therapist, it was like if you didn't work with whatever suggestion or exercise or tool that I brought up, then by definition, it's unworkable. Like it doesn't matter if the evidence is there behind it. So I like this idea of like the shift. I wonder if we get to discrete negative emotions, right? And we get to like
Mhm.
envy and
Mhm.
jealousy and guilt, and you're kind of really hitting like the one that I always hit about is sort of like this like rage and irritation and disdain for the world kind of that happens there. If maybe these models sort of fall apart a little bit because some of these emotions are just some of these negative emotions are so damn functional for problem solving more than other ones.
Mhm. Yeah, I mean, I think this, not to get too far in the weeds, like my read on that was always the approach oriented side of this, so the ones that, again, like anger is negative, but it's approach oriented, that we're going to go after the problem, whereas something like shame or guilt are these more avoidant sides of it. And so, yeah, if we want to put one more degree of complexity on it, right, we need to have approach oriented emotions on both sides, and that goes for positive emotion too, right? Like the when we're just kind of like satisfied and happy,
Content,
like that. Yeah.
tranquil.
Yeah, content, like that, those aren't great things for creativity either, right? Like it's like both sides of this need to have the approach orientation for them to be functional, and that kind of, at least, you may know this stuff better than I do, but my last read of all that was any kind of avoidant oriented emotions tended to be bad for creativity, and so we needed to have the approach oriented flavors of both negative and positive emotions.
I am so glad you brought this extra level of complexity because one of the things that I bemoan is how many practitioners, coaches, God, I hate to use the word influencers, people with platforms where they talk about emotions in such a simplistic way still of chasing happiness is not
Mm.
the path to becoming happy. I'm like, well, Jonathan Schooler did that study in the 1980s. And yes, it's still true, but you're bringing Charles Carver's freaking awesome Psych Bulletin article into play about like approach oriented negative emotions. Hey, if you haven't heard that term before, start playing with that. Let's talk
Mhm.
about it. It's a sophistication that's required. But what I also like that we're talking about here, and it kind of gets with the whole premise of your work, it is so much stuff at self help is at the individual level. So much um, group help books like don't exist. It happens there. But now you're actually talking about like emotions at levels of analysis. So emotions
Mhm.
at the individual, emotions at the team, and emotions kind of at like the larger community society that happens there. So what are your thoughts of people that when they're interested in emotional contagion, another like 80
Mhm.
degree
Yeah.
pivot here? So there's this interesting work by Thomas Joyner who started it, which is basically now you probably know that both my daughters just started college, so
Yeah, I saw it. Congrats, man. Yeah.
yeah, so now I'm like sort of obsessed with this kind of time in your life. And Tom Joyner had this work in the 90s showing that if you have two roommates and one of them is depressed, what happens to the other roommate over the course of the semester? And these are the kind of like real world questions that I think people should be starting from because you can hypothesize either way. And what his work found was the strength is one direction. The depressed
Mhm.
the depressed roommate has a much more powerful influence of bringing down the psychological state of the other roommate that happens there.
Mhm.
No matter what Alice Eisen and Barbara Fredrickson's work on positive emotions says, like
Mhm.
it's just stronger. And I don't just want to say it's a negativity bias. I want to say
Mhm.
it's something more akin to what you're doing in terms of group dynamics, in terms of there's something about two people spending time together that's more than just negativity bias. It's just like your micro ecosystem is like contaminated in some way. And I wonder like how this plays out in teams in terms of you never know what emotions people are going to bring into the room unless you ask. And even if you ask, most people lie because they kind of know what to say to keep social desirability and social status up. So, how do you deal with those kind of findings in your groups?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, I feel like, this kind of like perspective that I come from, we often sort of treat the emotions as emerging from the collaboration, right? That like we're mostly concerned with, all right, if we get off to a good start and things are going well, then that kind of spirals and we notice it. Whereas if we notice things are like not going so well, then everyone starts blaming each other, and then we start getting a bunch of dysfunction that emerges from that. I think we're not as good about figuring out what happens when people bring strong emotions into the room in the first place. And that,
Yeah.
especially when when you study these kind of workplace interactions for the most part, which is most of what I do, people are pretty good at hiding what they're really feeling, or at least not fully admitting it. I think we are pretty sophisticated at picking up on those things. And I think it would be interesting, particularly if people are bringing strong emotions in. They're not, you know, the kind of overall climate consistent necessarily with the overall climate of the group or the organization. How much can they kind of like infuse what they're feeling into what everyone else is feeling? I mean, I've certainly seen some work like from Sigal Barsaid and Andrew Knight and others about positive emotions being contagious under those conditions. I haven't seen as much about negative emotions, and that I think like it could, like, I can see kind of two arguments again, depending on like how everyone else responds. Like if like, and this kind of goes to a study I talk about in the book a fair amount, which is about social sensitivity being this really reliable predictor of group performance across different kinds of tasks. So social sensitivity is our ability to detect the emotions of others without them telling us. And that in the more, what I've always imagined the kind of group mechanism to be behind that is like if I look at you, it's like, oh, Todd doesn't look like he's having a good time today. I'm going to like actively modulate my behavior to accommodate that.
Yeah, there's
And
like a co-regulation that's occurring because
yeah,
of your sensitivity.
yeah. And so like if we imagine that that's what like really good groups are doing, then you could imagine the like, coming into a really good group like is actually good for you. Like it's going to help the person who's not feeling good, that they'll offer support. And that like that's at their core kind of what groups are supposed to do, right? Like the if teamwork is just kind of another way of saying like we help and we care for each other in sort of interdependent ways about sometimes really instrumental stuff and sometimes emotional stuff. And if somebody comes in feeling bad and we're able to figure that out, then the system should be theoretically trying to help that person. And that's certainly how I would, the best teams that I've been a part of, like when somebody's off, you try to figure out why they're off and you try and help. And so it's not necessarily this like just, affect infusion model where it's like, oh, you're feeling bad and I kind of like sense that, but we don't do anything about it. It's like groups are more agentic than that. They like do and
Good
they
word.
intervene in the emotion.
Yeah. What I like about this is it goes well beyond it's somewhat of a trope. I just think it's like too simplistic, which is as you can imagine, this is what bothers me about well-being science is vulnerability and exposing it is a form of courage. Okay,
Mhm.
fine. But like what's the process? What's the specifics? What do you do about that? And then everything you just said, which everyone can rewind, gets into like the details about this. So this leads to like another thought that I have this unpublished paper that eventually I will. It's about emotional prejudice, and I can't. I just need like to. I got too many things on my plate. But so this is probably a little bit of a knowing from my reading of the literature. This can be a little bit of a hypothesizing by you as opposed to like known facts. But you are the group expert. Is in group settings. So choose your favorite, right? PTA meetings, bunch of parents hanging out,
Mhm.
sports organizations. Like which emotional prejudices do you think is right now culturally? I know you're at the UK, but we can kind of, you still got a weird country just like me
Yeah.
with UK, US, Australia, Canada. Like which emotional biases sort of bother you the most that they're still in existence in society?
So by emotional biases, you mean, can you just say a little more about what you mean by emotional
Oh yeah, yeah,
biases?
sure, yeah, yeah. It's like it's almost like any bias. So it's basically it's
Mhm.
like when this emotion is generated or it's expressed, is like there's a little bit of repulsion that happens there.
Mhm.
Now, some of it is unconscious, just like unconscious racial biases. A lot of it is conscious, where people just, my kids that are at James Madison at Virginia Tech right now, their first year, I'm not there, but my guess is they're attracted to people who have lots of vitality over people that are very fatigued.
Mhm.
There's an emotional bias in terms of attraction repulsion.
Yeah. I mean, it's funny. In the UK, it's like, all of them. The stereotype that like we just don't express our emotions as much, I think is absolutely true. I think here though, it's a little there's more bias towards positive emotions than there is in the US, where if you're a really over the top, effusive, positive person, like people will look at you a little funny here, that like you don't encounter that as much. My wife actually, she is a very like positive person, wears her heart on her sleeve. And I think that was an adjustment we didn't foresee here, where we came and it's like, oh, the UK culture, does it's not open bias, right? It's just like the social norms that exist everywhere are really powerful, and that when other people aren't acting the way we're acting, it makes us uncomfortable. And so I think we definitely see that here. I think though, like, as somebody who mostly studies work and studies creativity and improvisation, like the association of I don't think it's that I think it's an emotion that we shouldn't be biased against, is I would say shame and its kind of association with failure are things that I think that bother me routinely. Especially, it's like I teach business school students all the time, and you know, my class is always the one where I'm putting them in positions where it's like, yeah, I'm going to make you fail, and that we're all going to fail together, and that's how we're going to learn stuff. And that, like, I feel like that's really uncomfortable for a lot of people who are kind of put into these like more achievement oriented kinds of systems, where
Yeah.
they're not used to failure being okay. And so so maybe this isn't answering your question, but that like
No, no,
I
no, it's
don't like
fine.
the association between failure and shame. And then but I think our inability to then talk about that is also preventing us from overcoming it.
Yeah. Yeah. And there's a big part of like, if you get someone that overly identifies with the task success, and and then all of a sudden you lose them, like you lose them for the next three projects as a result of that shame
Yeah.
element. Johnny Dunn has a nice question that builds on something that you said earlier, which is, how can we take the negative emotions that exist in a group and then use it to leverage more creativity?
Yeah, I mean, I think this does get into your point, Todd, about discrete emotions, right? Like there, I think it does depend which negative emotions we're talking about. In some cases, that if we're talking about something like people feeling shame or people feeling distressed or you know or anxious, there that to me suggests more of a like a caring response within the group versus if it is more of this kind of like, I'm angry, I'm distressed, I'm like I'm confused, I'm that those kind of emotions, I think, then are good jumping off points for saying, well, what can we do about them? What can we do collectively to improve the world? So I think, the meeting, it sort of, it depends. Is this one person, or is this all of us kind of meeting, bonding over our shared dissatisfaction, which I think can be a very functional thing.
Yeah.
Whereas if it's like, individuals within the group that are having these negative emotions, it can also bring us together if we then use that as a way to kind of entrench a culture of help within the group, and the culture where we are going to support each other, and we're going to, not, sort of with your emotional biases, treat those people as the ones that we should keep at arm's length and not touch for a while.
Yeah, there's so many tributaries with everything you're saying. Johnny, I should probably tell you is that when I give organizational workshops, and feel free to steal this, at the very end of the workshop, I have on a slide that appears one question. What are you still confused or muddled about today? And then I front load it. I think that's exactly what Colin is saying as well. Is that front load and say, I just want you to know why I'm asking this question. Is what we know is that whatever you're still confused about or muddled about, first of all, I don't care if you blame me because lots of things are my fault if I'm running a workshop. Whatever you write down is the thing you're most likely inclined to still look up after this workshop is over. So I want you to write something down. You should write something down because there's no way that I'm that clear after talking for
Mm.
an hour, 2 hours. And then people often come up to me after workshops and it's not the thing they love the most. It's like, hey, that confusion thing, this is what I wrote down. Like, and then I'll just write down, like, hey, check this book out, check this freaking website out, check out this article out there. And so right away, it's like, to me, instead of getting stuck on these beloved Harvard Business Review terms, not to pick on your Harvard, is, growth mindset and grit and my thing, curiosity, whatever the word of the week is like very specifically emotionally, that is the productive element of this emotion. But most of us have been trained our whole lives that confusion means you're kind of
Mhm.
you're kind of automatically categorized as an idiot. Like, how do you not know this after listening to this for an hour?
Yeah, no, it's funny. I love that, and I may steal that yet. But the with so right now I'm the PhD program director, so a lot of my teaching is with the PhD students. But I assign an article that's called "The Importance of Stupidity in Scientific Research," and it's like,
Good title.
if you're not going out and feeling dumb and feeling confused, you're not going to learn anything important, right? Like that, like approaching those places where you're going to feel like you don't know, that's where creativity starts, right? Like if you don't approach the unknown, you're not going to ever really ever find things, and especially in science, right? Like that's the whole point of, making a contribution, is learning something that nobody knows yet. And so it's going to be unknown, and you're going to have to, that's going to make you feel stupid for a little while. And that's part of it.
There's th-
That's got to
there's
be part of it.
there's such a wild interface here with that note between curiosity and creativity.
Mm.
Like I think of when I was just talking about this on a podcast yesterday. When they asked me like how I got into curiosity, and I picked up this Canadian author's book, Daniel Berlin, still not famous enough in psychology,
Yeah.
in 1960. And then I read it, and my first reaction was, first is, well, to your point about old books, this is really freaking hard to read. Like I thought I was smarter than this. I'm in a PhD program. But then the second was, how do I find a question that extends Dan's stuff, right? That goes in there. And like, this is like all novel. It's like the novelty in the study of novelty and curiosity that was happening there. And that, like you said, like that stupidity is like what generated like my 25 years plus of studying curiosity. It all started from
Uh,
being totally bewildered by this guy's brilliance.
mhm. Yeah, no, that's great. Think that's the way to do it.
Is there is there and I know we're biased because you and I know a lot of authors, but outside of that group, is there like a book you've read that you just like, oh my God, I've got a captive audience here. This is the one that you should read before they get your Substack and they read your book recommendation list.
Yeah, I mean, there are so many. It's funny. I mean, I probably shouldn't admit that I'm not a big reader of the genre of book that we write until I started doing this, until I started like really trying to understand it. And I mean, I think one of the books that influenced me a lot, especially if getting back into this, I want to be more spontaneous idea, is called Free Play by Stephen Nachmanovich, who
Never heard of
is,
it.
yeah, no, he's a violinist. I mean, I think if you're not a musician, it may not be one that you naturally bump into, but it was great in kind of taking principles about like what does it really mean to be spontaneous, when we have this experience of having this inner monologue that has a sense of we're directed by goals and that we're planning and that we're running around doing that, and saying like, then maybe that's not what we're doing. And, using kind of music as a vehicle, like when you're singing, when you're playing, when you're doing something and you really like reflect on that experience, it kind of gives you this window into a different way of being and thinking. So I think that was a book that influenced me a lot, that I think not a lot of people know about.
Perfect. That's what I should have
Yeah,
said ahead of time.
yeah.
Serena, the book, if you were referring to what I said, it was Daniel Berlin. I think the title, I know it's behind me, but in the name of time, I'm not going to try to search for it.
Yeah.
Curiosity, conflict, and arousal. But if you find it, I mean, I think on Amazon, it's like 80, it's one of those books that's like $85. There were no soft covers back then. So
That's-
is there anything that I should have asked that you'd like to talk about the
you
collective
know,
edge?
yeah, it's so hard for me to answer that, once you're like 40 podcasts deep in a book, that's like something we didn't I say that already? So yeah, I mean, I think we've got the basic thing. I mean, the more like the pitch I have for people is really tying back into what you were saying about there's so much about how we experience the world as individuals, how we can improve ourselves as individuals, and that I really just think if you think really deeply about groups, if all that my book does is make you think 10%, 20% more about what a group is and like how they're different and why they are the way they are, I think that on its own would improve the world, because we are seeing, you know, I I think I only briefly touch on it in the book, but like individualism's at an all-time high. That every metric that people who study individualism versus collectivism can find, it's been just increasing, increasing, increasing over the last 100 years, and it's all over the world. And that I think a lot of our inability to cope with big problems that are going to require crossing group boundaries comes from the fact we're paying less attention to groups than we ever did before. We don't think of ourselves as part of a larger whole to the extent that our ancestors did.
Yeah.
And that I think we do need to kind of rebalance those scales a bit if we're going to solve any of these problems that are facing us today.
Colin, I don't want to end on this question, and I'm hesitant to even ask this question, but the question came into my head, and I don't want you to hate me. So, if you let me ask this question,
Yeah.
can we not end this
Yeah.
question?
Yeah. All right. All right. We won't end on this question.
Okay. All right. I have to know because I read way too many books, way too many psychology books. So, what was your thinking? Because so many people in the modern book industry hit Solomon Ash's study, Stanley Milgram's study, the NASA Space Challenger
Hmm.
disaster, Robbers Cave study, um, and you hit so many of these, like the Bay
Hmm.
of Pigs, and
Yeah.
then it's like like what was your thought process to go for these stories versus finding ones that none of us really know about?
Yeah. It was a big decision, I think, when I was thinking about what the book was going to be. And I think it's again like, who are you writing for? And that idea of like, who are the ideal readers of this book? And do they already know this or do they not already know this? And I tried to hedge my bets and to think, well, I do think my ideal readers on some level don't know this in the same sense that my 19-year-old and my 17-year-old don't know these stories, right? That they don't know about this, that there's still a generation of people out there who have not yet heard these things. But I also tried with all the really classic stories I was telling to at least take a different bent on them and to tell some part of the story that wasn't usually told. So I think with the Robbers Cave one, I spent a lot of time
You
telling
did good. You
what
did good.
yeah. Yeah, what I think is a really unknown part of that story, which is that,
No, don't
so
tell
we've
it. Don't
had
tell it.
yeah,
Don't tell it.
all
Don't
right,
tell it.
yeah, all right. All right. Well, I won't tell you. You'll have to get in the book. Yeah, and we have to get one more question in. Yeah, but there's an unknown study he did that's really interesting, that bears kind of on how we think about what Robert's Cave even is. So I tried to, contextualize them with what we know today, and also, we can't do those studies anymore. Like, there's a reason we keep telling those studies, like, you could not run that today. There's no way.
Yeah, I think about
We
that all the time.
yeah, yeah.
God, how
So
how
yeah,
fun
yeah.
would it have been to be a 1950s, 1960s researcher? I mean, just
I know it was crazy, man. He was gonna light a fire around those kids, like,
no, don't
he,
say,
yeah,
don't tell. Yeah, I mean, it's
yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
I mean and there's just a lot of hidden gems. And the other thing is I always think of in this world of creativity, everyone can search for something online. Everybody can
Mhm.
find a best-selling Substack. But if you can open up an older book, you can find like just gold mines of content that just people can't find. I mean, that's just
Yeah,
one of those like secret portals that goes in there.
yeah,
Um, so okay, because I don't want to enter that
yeah.
question. And thank you. That was a great answer. I was gonna hesitate to ask the question, but
No, no, it's a great question.
I'm just very curious in the process.
Mm,
So can I give you a compliment that's also like a little bit, I mean, the name of my Substack is Provoked.
yeah.
Um, Here's something that I really appreciated. I have found, and feel free to add any comments you want, just don't do ad hominems, is that many of our colleagues, they take a book that is totally unrelated to politics, and then they try to shove in a lot of ideology in there. Like there's a climate change chapter, there's a racism chapter, there is a GMO chapter, and I read it and I'm just like, why? Like you don't have to have any like like virtue political ideology status games. And I just want to say that I really appreciate that I was looking for it and you didn't have like you wrote, you stuck with the topic, and then I think you're like very evenly balanced. And I don't think there's I wish for more academics to be not afraid to tackle difficult topics,
Mhm.
but what's the purpose, what's the motive of tackling the difficult topic?
Yeah, well, I appreciate that thing. I was trying hard for that in part because part of the message is like we have to be able to speak to each other across divides and not kind of do this funny issue bundling that has
It's a
kind
good
of
term.
happened in the world. And that like I talk about, this whole kerfluffle when the M&Ms, how they changed the shoes that they were wearing happened. And then like you had to like have all these other political beliefs that were associated with your belief about like M&M's shoes. And so like I had to then try myself really hard not to do that, like regardless of what my own political beliefs are or aren't, to be like, I'm criticizing that because I know it's bad for groups, it's bad for getting us across divides. And if I'm going to do that in my book, then, a lot of people who need to hear the message are not going to be willing to entertain it. So
Yeah.
I did try really hard to kind of practice what I was preaching in terms of, staying true to the evidence and saying things I think are true and are warranted by that, but to be really a messenger for what I think the kind of like sum total of how we're going to, get groups with more diverse perspectives and to work together effectively.
Yeah, and I thought that was a really good example, very original to kind of, I would sort of like, for lack of a better word, encapsulate the culture wars without obsessing over it. I thought that was like,
Mhm.
I enjoyed the whole section, and I get very tired of the culture wars. So let me end on this, and is one of the things that you do. So if you don't follow Colin on LinkedIn, you definitely should because he's has amazing levels of practical advice that he's not just like the author of this one book. But one thing that you really do is like you really try to help people write better, think better, speak better, and I was wondering of as this is your first book, what advice you'd have for people who really want to create their first book, based, and then what. And let me even be more precise because it's hard to answer those
Mhm.
really generalist questions. What were you surprised that was more difficult than you thought in writing your first book for advice for other people?
Yeah. I mean, I think especially if you're somebody who has that, that curiosity to really get deep knowledge about something, and you can explain it in ways that other people find, illuminating and entertaining, like you're in short supply. So I would encourage people to who feel like they can do that to do that. And I think that was something our shared friend Dolly Chug said in a panel once when I was kind of thinking about writing a book. It was like, the world needs people who can understand evidence and say it in a way that people can understand. And so if you have any inclination towards that, like there's still a need out there
I
for
love
people to
that.
do that. Yeah. So jump in and do it. I actually, I've heard so many people talk about the writing process being painful. To me, like I had a good time. I mean, I was on sabbatical, so I have an easier time of it than another. But it felt like relative to academic writing, it felt like I had been like
Oh my god.
having weights on the whole time. It's like, oh, I can make jokes. I can like talk about examples I'm interested in just because I'm interested in them. It's great. I enjoyed that.
Yeah.
I liked researching it. I think I thought you know going on a ton of podcasts and doing all the social media stuff, like I thought that would be a little. I thought it would feel different than it felt. I would say that I'm not sure I'd do anything differently, but I think I I underestimated how much energy it might take from other things I was doing. And
Yeah.
that's not necessarily a bad thing. Like I think it's fun. Like this has been great. This one hasn't been it is
Oh,
energy
thank you.
tucking. Yeah. But like I mean just being on camera a lot more, I would say, honestly, was one of the like more tiring parts of it, where it was like, oh, the podcasts aren't just people talking and hearing your voice. It's like, you've got to like figure out your lighting, which I did a terrible job of during this, during
No,
sunset.
it's great. It's
And
soft and
no,
gentle. And
no, yeah, I know you're seeing my trees in the backyard there and the sunset here in the UK. But so I think the things I might yeah, I don't know what I would if these are things I would do differently, but I'm still too in the middle of it to have like synthesized the advice of it, which is I'm planning for one of my next Substack posts to just like force myself to kind of like reflect on the journey
oh,
and
good.
be like, what did I learn? But it's been great, especially like learning about other people's work and learning about how everyone else does this. So one piece of advice would be to look at everyone else who's out there in this space as allies and potential collaborators and people that you're going to be in a community with, not
It's
your
great.
competitors,
It's
not the
great.
people that you're trying to, outdo in some way, or that somebody got some opportunity that you didn't get, or got wrote up here or there and you didn't, or, what got a better publisher, or whatever it is. That, like, just if you approach it as like, there's this great bunch of people you don't know. You and I didn't know each other before this.
Yeah.
And you're going to meet some great people and make some friends and learn, really find some interesting thinking and interesting ideas that you hadn't found. And I think I'm still maybe I'm in the honeymoon phase, but I'm still thinking like it's a great world. Everybody should try it out and try and approach it with, a mindset of trying something different. Like, you learn something about yourself, you learn something about the world. And, if that's not what we're all doing here, I don't know what we're doing.
I love what you said. I love the idea of like trying really hard to dismantle that natural competitive instinct of like, oh my God, look where they got. Like, look how many copies they sold. Like, look at all the attention that they're getting. I cherish, just like you and I just having one conversation before this. Like, I love watching all the love for you and your book, like for your launch. Like, it's like
Oh,
so enjoyable, like the emails and then the posts online. Like, it's just like, like like as someone who's written, I forgot how many books are, I think I wrote like three, is like just like I keep a rainy day folder. Like, you should like screenshot all those posts, all those emails, and then put them in that little folder for that day when you're just like totally burnt out, and just like sit and like drink a whiskey or whatever it is you do, and just look at those, because you're getting like lots of love. And um you do, it's a great thing. Like you see the humanity in what you produced. If you came in late,
mm,
this is the book that we're talking about, but we're going well beyond the book and this conversation here with Colin. Um, and I strongly recommend that he has a Substack. I recommend, because I just love the way that Colin thinks. That's why we're talking to each other right now. Um, and I think both of us really just kind of, there's a lot of us, like there's like a good group of friends, and we all kind of gravitate towards LinkedIn just because there's just less trolls. There's just less
mm,
annoying people. Well, I shouldn't say, they're annoying in different ways.
yeah, yeah,
Asking you to do consultations and give up hours of your life for free, but that's a
yeah,
different thing. But there's just like, people are just nicer. I think they realize that it's not good to look like a mean, spiteful person when business opportunity people are potentially watching your post. So I like that
yeah,
kind of, there's like a little bit of just in the air, the ether is the idea of like assholes don't prosper in this environment. So that's, I don't know if you feel the same way,
yeah.
but that's why like to me it's like Substack and LinkedIn.
Yeah, no, those are my two as well. I mean, I'm dabbling a little bit more in Instagram right now, but it's really been Substack and LinkedIn. And LinkedIn, I think it's also just like it was clear what it wanted from me on some level. Like, it's, and you say I like talk about writing and research and that process, and from teaching a PhD class now for a number of years. It's like, that stuff's easy. It's just stuff. It's basically like I'll come out of a meeting with a student. I'm like, oh, I say that a lot. I'll just post that on LinkedIn
Yeah, yeah,
because
yeah. Right.
it seems like
It's
that's what people want.
a natural extension. Colin, awesome seeing you. Cannot wait till we get to celebrate with a toast in person.
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
let's do this again. And I am excited to hear you and my boy Kwame have a conversation on Negotiate Anything, the podcast,
Yeah,
because
no,
he's
it's a super fun one. It was great to meet him.
he
Yeah,
is one of my favorite
and
people to eat with. So we will get in touch. So thank you, and thanks for
amazing.
everyone for listening. Because um, I only want to bring people that I like. So that's
Yeah.
how this works.
But thanks so much, Todd. It was great talking a second time with you. We'll have to do it a third time sometime soon.
No doubt. Yeah.
All right.
Hey,
All right,
good luck
man.
with lunch.
Thank you so much. Thanks.